Alright, I've tried recording this video like 50,000 times, but I just feel like it's not right, but feel like it's a good time to do a check-in on the Sixers because I haven't really done one much this year. As you can imagine, it's been a absolutely frustrating season with like 3 good bright spots in there somewhere, but for the most part, the season's been an unmitigated disaster, man. And I recorded a, audio thing for my video back in November. This was after Embiid fractured his sinus. This was after Jared McCain tore the meniscus in his knee. And I basically was saying that we should call the season. Call the season. Trade whatever you can to get some assets. Try to get reps with the big three as much as possible, and just try again, right? But then I thought maybe that was a little too emotional because at that point the big three hadn't really played together. They had made their debut in the Memphis game in November and only played 6 minutes together. Paul George had 2 hyper extensions in his left knee to open the season. Maxey had a hamstring issue. And Embiid, who we will talk about more extensively later, had knee issues in his left knee swelling. So the start wasn't good, but they hadn't been healthy. Then they posted the 9-3 December. It really didn't feel like they went 9-3 in December because the basketball was still like watching a root canal, but you could see flashes in there, flashes of a good defense, some offensive possessions where you're like, oh, okay, you could definitely see how this would work with everybody working off of Embiid's gravity coupled with Tyrese Maxey and Paul George, right? They are like 6-0 in the games that they start together and finish together. You have to put that caveat in there because they played more games together, but wouldn't finish them because of an injury or an ejection and or insert whatever problem here, right? Then this recent stretch has happened where the Sixers just lost to the Knicks tonight. They lost last night to the Oklahoma City Thunder in a game that they punted because, when you're 15-22, you still punt games, I guess, and act like you've won 40 games. And let me just say, Sixer fans, I think, you just have to reevaluate what your expectations are for this season. And I know that's obvious to say, but the reason these games have been frustrating to watch is because you had this great offseason, right? I would still do the offseason over again. I would still do the same thing, and that's something I'll talk about in a little bit. But you have this big offseason. You have these expectations. Looks like the Sixers are going to, start taking Embiid's load management throughout the season seriously because they're going to have to manage that left knee. And then all hell just breaks loose immediately. Embiid's not healthy to start the season. There's all this weird ambiguity and lack of transparency, as usual, from this fucking franchise around Embiid's health. And then it spirals into other weird stuff like the quotes that Embiid said earlier in the year about how much he's done for the city, then the shoving incident with Marcus Hayes. It's like if a writer took a single plot point from each of the previous 5 seasons of a show and then decided to stack it all together in the season finale because they just ran out of ideas. So for the season finale, they're just gonna play all the old hits all at the same time. And it's all happened at once. Rookie out for the year because of an injury, promising rookie out for the year because of an injury, an Embiid injury, a new Sixer player forgetting completely how to shoot, or there's something wrong with his shooting mechanics when talking about Caleb Martin. And then, of course, the 2 stars, Maxey and Paul George, they haven't been shooting up to snuff until Paul George recently. And so what you have here is just a season that is not only disappointing, a disaster, a failure, whatever it is you want to use. And really the only 2 bright spots you had was Jared McCain, who, when the Sixers were playing that in November, that was literally the only watchable thing that you could cling on to, and Gershon Yabusele, who Unfortunately, he's played so well, I don't think he's going to be back on the Sixers next year, so we wasted a valuable minimum contract, potentially, because this team is 1, not healthy, 2, not good, and 3, just lack all types of creativity from the coaching staff. We are wasting a season from an awesome minimum signing. Yabu is a really good player, and I'm glad that I like this story. He went overseas, fixed what he needed to fix. That 3-ball was translatable because he has a bunch of other little skills, and it all just rolls up into one role player everybody would love to have, right? And those are the only 2 bright spots. Oh, and then Justin Edwards. Let me mention Justin Edwards because he was on a 2-way. He went undrafted. 6'7", could shoot. I really didn't follow. Justin Edwards wasn't one of the prospects I was following closely, so whoever is a draft nerd is going to have to tell me how a 5-star recruit, why he didn't play so well at Kentucky, blah, 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 because I'm looking at Justin Edwards in the last 3 weeks. He's been getting real rotation minutes, surprisingly, and he's been playing really well, playing within himself, shooting threes, defending, using his length. For a rookie, I would say he's pretty solid defensively. He's just a rookie, so he doesn't know the scouting report and the tendencies of the players he had to guard. Jalen Brunson got him a few times tonight despite good initial defense. And he shoots threes without hesitation, which if you're 6'7", can defend and can shoot, you have a spot on this team. So I guess, I'll just start with the big fella because obviously this is not how Sixer fans hoped it would turn out. I made the argument in the offseason that this was the best fitting team of the Embiid era, and I still believe that on paper. But the problem with that is even if you have a Paul George and a Tyrese Maxey and you upgrade the role players a little bit, the team is still built around your best player. And when you don't have him, it's just hard. And this team has not been able to build chemistry. And really, the main issue in all of this is, and this is something that Sixer fans are just going to have to reconcile with for the next 2 to 3 years, that left knee is now in the Tim Duncan stage, the late Tim Duncan stage. And Tim Duncan had to manage that left knee, had a meniscus surgery on it in his career, and that was something he had to manage late in his career. And this is something Embiid is going to have to manage. The only thing is, I don't think the Sixers expected it to blow up in their face this soon. When the Sixers signed Paul George and then extended Maxey and then extended Embiid, I was of the thought that this would be a 2 to 3 year window for this core, right? I didn't think the Sixers were going to compete this year. At the very least, I thought that they were going to play frequently or as much as possible together, gain some chemistry, see what type of team you have in there. And, I know I picked them before the season to make it to the conference finals, but they had that type of talent to me. Not that they could win, but they could at least get past the second round if the right matchup broke and the team actually got some reps and chemistry together and formed good basketball. And that just hasn't been the case. And you could just go all the way back to Embiid. And Embiid has had a weird year. I imagine a frustrating year for him. And unfortunately, he is at the stage now where it's put up or shut up time. And the injuries have just come at the worst time. Unfortunately, the Sixers and Embiid, because Embiid has this thing where he doesn't want people to perceive that he's injury prone, even though we all know that he's injury prone. So he makes the Sixers be really not transparent with his injuries. And that lack of transparency just opened up the door for all these takes nationally, takes from media members that cover teams in different markets, et cetera, to just open fire on Embiid for his lack of competitive nature, even though that's bullshit, or the fact that he doesn't want to play in games, which is bullshit. When people with common sense can just simply look at the fact that Embiid had a second meniscus surgery on his left knee, a left knee that, by the way, has suffered other injuries throughout his career, and that left knee just has to be managed. And that knee acted up, and it swelled up, and that's why he missed the start to the season. And that's why he's been missing a lot of games now. Here is a foot sprain, but apparently that got worse. And this is something Embiid's going to have to deal with for the rest of his career. That's why he talked about not playing back-to-backs and all that stuff. And unfortunately, that just allowed people like Shaq and other people to just open fire on him, not knowing the context of why he said that, because he doesn't want to give the context. And look, it's tough, but when you're talking about Embiid, this is a guy there are very few players in the league you build around. There's 10 to 12 players probably, and Embiid is one of those guys. And I wouldn't trade him. I guess for better or worse, for what I'm saying, there is no better option beyond the 2 years, because I know people are talking about trading Embiid and moving on. Moving on to what exactly? Unless you really believe Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain as a backcourt can lead the Sixers to a championship any closer than Embiid can. Unless you think Maxey or McCain can become an MVP caliber player. Where exactly is the MVP caliber player going to come from if you move on from this one, though he is injury prone? You have the contracts locked in. You have the assets. You're starting to find good role players. I would just, for this season, hopefully Embiid can get through this foot sprain thing. You just got to hope the big three can play together as much as possible. And if they make the play-in, cool. If they don't make it, that obviously sucks. And we probably lose the top 6 protected pick. That'll go to Oklahoma City. But honestly, that was a long shot to keep the pick. That was never going to happen. You can't tank when you have 3 max players on the roster. And I'm not in the business of moving on either, because there's no better options to get us any closer than to just get the chemistry down now while you can, knowing that you're not going to do shit this year, and then try again next year. Because when Embiid came back, he was averaging 30-7 on 50% shooting, but the last few games he was starting to rebound well, and you could just tell Embiid just does not have confidence in that knee, and it has been frustrating for him, and it has manifested in different weird ways, not to psychoanalyze, but the altercation with Marcus Hayes, the weird reaction he had to the Victor Wembanyama foul, and got tossed from that game, yelling, screaming, losing his mind at a referee. And so I imagine it's just been frustrating for him, and it's manifested in a lot of weird ways. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. Embiid's left knee is cooked. They have to manage it. But you try to manage it, because that dude can still give you 30 and 10 in his sleep. And he can still be a pretty effective defender when he's in. As far as Tyrese Maxey goes, I've been pretty disappointed. Not going to lie. I think this is where we took for granted that literally every year of his career before this season, Maxey took a jump, right? I actually thought he's taken a leap defensively this year. But as far as offensively, and look, I know he's not playing with Embiid, and Maxey's probably never going to be like an MVP caliber player. But I do think he could be an all-NBA type of player, or at least borderline, and he has simply not played like it this year. Doesn't matter if Embiid's out. You are a third max player. You got a max extension. You got to be able to finish more than 56% of your shots at the rim. Steep drop-off from last year at 63%. Steep drop-off shooting the 3-ball. Steep drop-off shooting wide-open threes. And you hope at some point that progresses to the mean, but we're damn near 40 games into the season. His decision-making has been erratic, and Sixer fans, I'm sure they have noticed this too, and it's been talked about a bit. But Maxey's demeanor, his attitude, his body language, it just all looks completely off this year. Complaining to the referees more, not getting back on defense, taking these weird layups that have no shot of going in, whether he is like, he could use an extra dribble just to get to the rim, or he takes off too far, or he gets in too deep and just traps himself in no man's land, throwing weird turnovers. His step back 3 isn't accurate at all, and it's never really been super accurate, but at least it's been 34, 35%. That's been off. Everything's been off with Maxey this year. And I think some of it is because of the increased strength that he's added on, and I wonder if that's affecting his shot, because you can't tell me that a person who shot 40% twice and 37% last year on more attempts after getting more offensive responsibility is this type of shooter this year. But it's been disappointing all around. His attitude, everything's been off. And I know people who, one, don't like Embiid, but two, love Maxey, were really just celebrating when Maxey called out Embiid in that team meeting. But a team meeting needs to be held to call Maxey out. And Maxey's kind of skated under the radar because he is the pick that kind of saved this franchise a little bit. Happy, joyful, all that stuff. Fan favorite. Showed immediately in the playoffs he's not scared of the moment. Well, now that he has a big boy contract, it is time for him to receive big boy criticism. And people have skated on giving Maxey criticism this year. But he hasn't been good enough. Because that was the other thing too. This was supposed to be the year where there was a complete team around Joel Embiid, to where Embiid could miss games and the Sixers would actually be a competent basketball team. And that still is not the case. Paul George, like Embiid, is one of those basketball players that's in the meme portal now. Like Paul George, no matter what he does, he could do all the right things. They're still going to get jokes off and stuff. I actually think Paul George, for all intents and purposes, has been fine this year. He had a slow start to the year. He had 2 hyperextensions that slowed him down. But even when his jump shot was not falling, and that includes jump shots where he normally makes wide open threes, and he just bricked a bunch of them to start the year. Or, excuse me, not to start the year, in November and December. The defense was still there, still elite, on ball, off ball especially. In Nick Nurse's defensive system, he's been really good at playing the passing lanes, causing havoc on the weak side, all that stuff. He's been really good rebounding. And even though every game he throws 2 passes, 2 passing turnovers that make me question reality, that make me question if a 5th grader would have made that turnover. His passing has been good. And now that his jump shot is finally coming together, in the month of January so far, he's averaging 21, nearly 7.5 rebounds, and 5 assists on 45% shooting from 3. Look, his first step has been long gone, going back to his Clipper days. So when you need him to scale up to be a number 1 or even a high-end number 2, that's going to be inconsistent as hell, as stars don't play. So it's a problem in that regard. But if you're just talking about what we signed him for, knowing that it was going to be an overpay, I think Paul George has been right in line with what I thought this year. I actually have a hot take. I think Paul George has been better than Tyrese Maxey this year. Paul George has certainly been our best defender this season. Certainly an offensive engine like Maxey, even though that gets a little iffy, but Paul George has been more effective spacing the floor, defensive playmaking, all that stuff. And Maxey, while there are flashes here and there, I just think for the most part, outside from like a 3-week stretch where he shot like 40% from 3, Maxey has been bad. And that's fine to say. I still like Maxey. I still think he's going to be a star. Ceiling, I don't want to place a ceiling on this kid, but you just got to be real with yourself and say that it's a down year. And speaking of being real, I got to be real with Nick Nurse. He's been fucking terrible this year, man. And he has all the reasons. Yes, he's dealt with injuries. Yes, the big fella has not played. But the lack of creativity offensively, or the lack of willingness to switch up your scheme, is astonishing. When you want to run a free-flowing type of offense, that requires quick decision-making. That requires high IQ. That requires good passers, and the Sixers just don't have that. And then the offense is basically, we're going to do a 3-man weave at the top of the key, not get into the paint, not collapse the defense, and then not generate open threes. Or we'll do a dribble handoff with Yabusele and then don't run it anymore. And even when Embiid was healthy, last year I thought Nick Nurse did a good job establishing what the offense was going to be. It's going to be two-man game between Maxey and Embiid, and shit's going to flow out of that. Whenever Embiid's been healthy, they've hardly ran two-man game. And then there'll be stretches where they run it, they'll go on a big run, and it's like, yes, this is the offense we envision. And then the next game, they don't run it. So it's very confused. I'm very confused at the job Nick Nurse is doing. And like I said, we were supposed to go into this year expecting Embiid to miss games, and therefore all the signings you made in the offseason meant that you were at least going to have a competent NBA basketball team on the floor when the big fella doesn't play. So you have to create a system out of that. You have to coach and prepare for that. And I just feel like Nick Nurse has not been good at that this year. Especially in some of the ways he uses Paul George too. Like, there's just too much Paul George in the mid-post. That is one thing I will say with the Paul George thing. There's too much Paul George stuff in the mid-post, but that just goes back to coaching. Paul George should be coming off of like pin downs and stuff like that. This guy is one of the great shooters in NBA history. Why are we not running him off of screens and shit like that? We just really haven't been impressed with Nick Nurse this year. At this point, if you're a Sixer fan that actually closely follows the team and stuff like that, and not just one of those, and I hate to be, patronizing like this, but one of those casual fans that's just coming in, parachuting from the Eagles or the Phillies season, I have to say, as an outsider, as someone who was born in California and not an Eagles or Phillies fan, that's really fucking annoying. The people that just tune in for one game. I saw a few comments on the Sixers subreddit that was like, yeah, well, the only game I've watched is Christmas. And, other than that, I've just been tuned out this year. But yeah, they should fire Morey and blow up the team. It's like, I don't want to hear your opinion, man. I don't want to hear it. If you followed this team closely and you think you should blow it up, I disagree with you heavily. And I would love to hear your rationale for it. But if you're just one of those casual fans that's, just comes in, or a WIP caller just calls in to shit on the team and stuff like that. By the way, I'm a Niner fan and a Padres fan, so fuck the Eagles and the Phillies. Still love the Sixer fans, though. You're just parachuting in talking about the Sixers season and didn't even pay attention. I don't want to hear it. But the goal should be, you just hope Embiid gets healthy and Paul George and Tyrese Maxey play as many games with Embiid as possible, get the reps. This tough part of the schedule, the Sixers are just going to have to be sellers. I don't think they're going to come out of this schedule in a good position to make the play-in. So you got to do what you can. Get as many reps together as possible. See where the end of the season takes you. If you're in the play-in, great. If you're not, well, that sucks. And just try again next year. But the main goal should be just try to form a good team somewhere down in there. And that's the other frustrating part about this season, especially early on. There were like bits and pieces. You would get piecemealed pieces of hope, just like, I could definitely see how Tyrese Maxey and Paul George will get open threes here. Oh, Jared McCain's playing nice. That's something nice there. Yabusele's playing nice. Boy, it'd be great if this team is healthy together. And then they have that 9-3 December. Get that nice big win on Christmas Day in Boston. And you have like some hope because you're like, oh, in all the times we played the Celtics in the Embiid era, I haven't had this many wings on the team that you could just throw at Tatum and Brown, right? I'm sure a lot of Sixer fans were thinking that. And now look where they are. A season marred by injuries, inconsistency, and just a lack of chemistry. And then, of course, you have some games mixed in there that feel like the process years if you're an old school process watcher. But don't really see this getting better soon. Hopefully the big fella comes back soon, gets some games under his belt, but I don't think that lotto pick is coming. I really don't think you can tank when Maxey and Paul George are healthy. Or maybe you can. Maybe you can stealth tank. But, yeah. Season's been a disaster. So it's time to reevaluate our expectations and try to set some at least good goals that you hope to see from the team. Like, for starters, playing together.